Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Kuf Yud Bet 112 in Bava Kamma. We are, like I said, a week away. On I guess Thursday of next week is daf Kuf Yud Tet, and Kuf Yud Tet is the last daf. So a week away. So it's hard to believe. So next Friday we'll begin Bava Metzia, exactly. That's what follows Bava Kama. March 1st. Yes, so that's a nice way to start. I will not be teaching next week, so it will be Dove, so it'll be just over Zoom again all week next week. But I will be back God willing, on the 4th, but I will be teaching next on the 6th, on Wednesday the 6th. So okay. So let's share the screen and get started. So what have we been discussing? Yesterday, we began the final chapter of Bava Kamma, and the Mishnah included the following rule. It said, if someone commits robbery and then leaves the stolen item for their heirs, so they commit robbery and then they die, the heirs are not liable to pay the owner. So if you inherit something that was stolen, that was robbed, you're not going to have to pay it back. And based on this teaching, Rami Bar Kamma offered the following. He said that this shows that possession of an heir is like possession of a purchaser, because basically, if you have a purchaser who buys something that was robbed or stolen, as long as the original owner gave up hope for getting it back, so then the purchaser is a legitimate purchaser. However, if the original owner was still trying to get it back, so then that would not be the case. But the key is that we're treating, according to Rami Bar Kamma, we're treating an heir exactly like a purchaser. That just like a purchaser doesn't have to give it back, an heir doesn't have to give it back. Rava disagreed, and we're going to see Rava disagreeing again. Now, we understood that Rami Bar Kamma was talking about the teaching in our Mishnah. Whereas we pick up right now at the top line of Kuf Yud Bet Amud Aleph, we're going to see that Rav Ada bar Ahava has this same teaching in connection with a brisa. So we pick up with the third word on Kuf Yud Bet Amud Aleph, and we say Rav Ada
Did
bar
we not
Ahava.
learn that in the case of the object still exists, there is an object that the heirs have to return the object?
If the object still exists,
They're obligated to pay or return the object, whatever it may be. There wasn't that part of
correct.
the teaching?
So, well, we have looked at that, but that issue is part of this debate, and so even though and so one could say that that situation is only where the original owner has not given
Right,
up hope.
right.
But if the original owner gave up hope, then that would not be the case. And so that is a piece of that discussion that when we had the discussion, we sort of glossed over. And so you're absolutely right to raise it, because we're essentially redoing that entire discussion and saying that it's dealing with a situation where the original owner has not, in that situation, the original owner has not given up hope and still wants his item back and still expects to get it back. The other thing to note is that we often dealt with that situation in a Geneva situation, and most of what we're talking about now is Gzela. Now, I don't know whether that would be another key difference between the two situations, but that's also important to understand that right now we're talking about Gzela. In a Gzela situation, everybody knows who took it. It's just about the ability to get it back. In a Geneva situation, you may not even know who took it. So those are a couple of important clarifications that you highlight we should make. So, okay, so Rav Ada bar Ahava masni lahad de Rami bar Kamma aha. That Rav Ada bar Ahava teaches Rami bar Kamma's lesson in connection with the following brisa. Now we're going to change the topic for just a moment and say what happens if a father charged interest to somebody else. Now, to another Jew. Now, Jews are not allowed to charge interest to one another. If we lend money, we have to lend money and allow the person to pay back the exact same amount that was borrowed. We don't charge interest. And so, but here, this person improperly charged interest. Now, it's important to note that if you charge interest to somebody, especially when we talk about classic interest, ribis titsutsa, where there's a fixed amount of interest that needs to be paid associated with the borrowing, well, then you are obligated to return the interest. You are not allowed to keep it. And so now we're going to deal with a situation where a father charged interest. He really owes the money back to the person he charged the interest to, but now he's passed away. So so a father passed away and gave the children now inherited the interest payments that the father had taken. Even though the children know that they're ribis. And again, we're now in the beginning of the fourth line on Kuf Yud Bet Amud Aleph, Ein chayavin lahachzir. They don't have to return it. So Amar Rami Bar Kamma. So on this, Rav Ada Bar Ahava says that Rami Bar Kamma said, Zos Omeris Rishus Yorish Kirishus Lokayat Dami, that the possession of the heirs is comparable to the possession of a purchaser. Exactly. And so, and Rava Amar, and Rava disagrees, as we had earlier. It would be this disagreement would move over to here. Really, I'll tell you that they're not alike, and really, an heir is not considered a purchaser. But why, in this particular case of interest, do we say that we're going to allow the heirs to keep it? The shiny haka, that case over there by interest is different. The Amar Kra al tikach me'ito neshek v'tarbit, because the verse specifically says, "Do not take from him interest and increase," but instead it concludes, "So that your brother may live with you." Imach, and so your brother, you have to return the investment because we want him to be able to live with you. It's specifically you that the person who took the interest that needs to return it. Libre, but your child, lo mazher le rachmana. The Torah doesn't warn. It's not about your children being able to live with him, and so as a result, the children don't have essentially the Torah excludes from the obligation to return the case on interest. So man demasdi le'abraisa, when Rabbi Ada Bar Ahava teaches Rami Bar Kamma's lesson in connection with the Brisa, Kol Shekain Misnisin. So he would certainly say that you would treat an heir like a purchaser in our Mishnah's case, because our Mishnah's case dealing with Gezela is definitely more like a Gezela followed by the passage of heirship. That is certainly going to be more like an acquisition than interest followed by the passage to heirship. So, and so as a result, that's why we're going to say that certainly kol shekain amasnisin, manda masni amasnisin, but one who teaches Rami Bar Kamma's lesson in connection with our Mishnah about a brisa, when it comes to this brisa with respect to interest, Rami Bar Kamma Rava Masnila. Rami Bar Kamma might think, just like Rava, that this is an exception. That yes, the halakha is still the same. Nobody's disagreeing that the heir doesn't need to return the interest, but the reason is different, because the reason may be that we're just going to have Xeris Akasav, and that it specifically says that you need to live with the person who is the borrower. The borrower needs to be able to live with you, and doesn't say anything about the children. And so, as a result, you're the one who has to return the ribis. Your children do not, but it has nothing to do with the fact that your children are considered like a purchaser.
Now, does this also apply? I'm sorry. Would this also apply in a situation where the father gave the money, gave them as a gift to the children before he died? Would children also be exempt from returning the ribis?
Excellent question. I would think so, because the they were not the ones. Now he still has an obligation. Well, two things. Uh, Ribis, there isn't the concept of the item still existing, because it's money, and money is fungible. And so as a result, the father who's still alive would still have an obligation to return the ribis, even if the precise dollar bills that were handed to him as interest were then handed to his children. But I would agree with you that the children would not have that obligation, even if they had benefited from the ribis. That's my understanding. That's certainly the way I would assume from this case.
He no longer has the money. He gave it all to his children.
Well, if he gave it all to his children, so then he still has. It's true that he doesn't have the money, but he still has the obligation. The obligation is still on him. So I think that would be my guess as to the halacha. Again, I haven't looked at the details, but I would think that yes, in fact, if he gifted it to his children, it would be the same. But let's take a look at Tosos. First, Tosos Kuf Yud Bet Amud Aleph. Im Tomar Vehechi Medaktek Mina De Kirishus Lokeach Dami. How can you say that just because the children get to keep the interest, that it's as if it's like a purchaser? Even if you don't say that it's like a purchaser, asi shaper de beturin, it makes sense that the children would be exempt. Kevan de midas nasan lo litnehu gabe betoris zela. So the point is that in this case of the interest, the money was given to him with intentionally. And so not in a it wasn't given him with the concept of it being stolen. It's as part of a loan agreement. And in general, we have the principle if John lends you money, and John borrows money from you and then dies, his heirs, and it's all an oral agreement, his heirs don't owe you anything. And so, because it's an oral agreement, so shouldn't this be treated no worse than an oral agreement to owe money and get paid back? And of course, the answer is yes, we're going to treat it differently. Even though the money, the interest was paid voluntarily, isnu gabai de Torah gzela. It does have the rule in connection with as if it was stolen items. Dahavi kinesina betos. It's like giving something by mistake, because the person isn't obligated to pay the interest. Even if you charge interest and you have a document that says you owe me interest, you are not allowed to collect it, and the person's not allowed to even pay it. And it wasn't given as a present. Elabatoris ribis. It was given as an interest payment. Umikre gazela, and so therefore be'ene, and so therefore we're going to call it as if it's stolen. Kaven shahamos ba'in. The money still exists. If it wasn't for the fact that we're treating this as a change in possession, we're going to treat it as if it was different. By the way, that's another potential answer to your question, Ken, that maybe the answer is that in the Gemaras that we were talking about, where if it still exists, we're going to say that you're obligated to pay it back. Those would follow Rava, who says that the possession of the heirs is not like the possession of a purchaser, but rather it's like the original possession of the thief himself. And so that could also explain why in certain circumstances, and when we saw in the Gemara earlier that we said that even if it's the heirs, if the object still exists, they have to pay it back. Okay,
so Tosos concludes that he would have to pay it back. Is that what he?
So the bottom line is that what Tosos is highlighting here is that if we don't say that the possession of the heirs is like a purchaser's possession, then you would have to give it back because it's considered the funds are still in existence, and so as a result, you'd have to pay it back because there is no yesh and shino rishus because there's no shino rishus. It's considered still the possession of the thief. Of course, if you hold as Rami Bar Chama does, that to say that it is considered like a purchaser's possession, then he would disagree with those earlier Gemaras that said if it still exists, you have to give it back. And he would say, no, it's considered a changed item. And so as a result, it's a changed possession. And so as a result, you don't have to give it back. Okay, so now the Gemara teaches another brisa regarding heirs returning something that was robbed by their father. So, and we're going to have, a series of at least two more of these brises. So let's take a look and we'll see them. So Tana Rabbanan, Hagozel uma'achil espanav, you rob and you feed it to your children. Petur milashalim, the children don't have to pay. But if you leave it for them as an inheritance, Gedolim chayavim l'shlolim. If they're adults, they do have to pay. Ketanim peturim l'shlolim, and if they're minors, they don't have to pay. Ve'im amru, and if it were be that they say Gedolim, if amru Gedolim, if the adults had said Ein anu yodim cheshbonot shechishev avinu imach, that we don't know the calculations that our father made with you, peturin, then they would not be liable. So the Gemara is very confused by that last statement because Mishum de Amri Ein Anu Yodim Baturim, because they say that we don't know that then they're not going to be liable. As Rashi says, it's Rashi about 20 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi. Mishum de Ein Yodim Baturim. Bidmiya, this is a question. Since they know that this item came to their father through theft, the bari v'shemahu. This is a case of one person arguing a certainty. It certainly still belongs to me, and the others arguing a shema. Maybe our father dealt with you with respect to it. Ubari adif, and in that kind of situation, we say that a bari is the one that wins, is the better one. So how can you possibly say that they're not liable? So Amarava Hachi Kamar. Gedolim Sha'amru Yodim Anu Cheshbonos Shechishev Avinu Imcha. That we know that our father had a deal with you. Below Pash Lach Gabe, below Midi, and we don't owe you anything. That's where Peturin, and that's where they're putter. Now, you might argue, as pointed out, that there's a famous line that when can no mean yes, right? Because if you say it sarcastically, no, then you mean yes. So here you can read this as Ein anu yodim cheshbonos shechishev avinu imcha. Do we not know the details of our father's dealings with you? Of course we do. And so as a result, that's what that essentially it's rereading that brisa to ask it like a question, a rhetorical question, where the answer is obviously that they do. But in any event, the bottom line is that they're not liable. Now, Tosfos here points out the migu, the sins that they could say that believe us of this because of we could have said, since we could have said this. Below pashlaka, second Tosfos, below pashlaka gabe, below midi peturim, right? We don't owe you anything. We could have just said that we returned it to you, and we would have been believed because you don't have any witnesses that we didn't. Or maybe there are no witnesses to the theft in the first place, but just based on the children admitting it. But the bottom line is that the basis for us accepting these words is the fact that the children have a migu. They have an ability to say, if we were a liar, we would have given you a different lie, and we would have been not liable. So you need to believe us based on our current state. Okay, so that was one brisa. Now we have another. Tanya Ida. Hagozo machil banav. Same beginning. You stole and somebody robbed and fed their children. Peturim l'sham, the children don't have to pay. If he left it for them and they ate it, bein gedolim, bein ketanim chayavim. Whoa! Here they were saying that they're going to be chayim. That was very different from what we said before. Ketanim mechayve. So first of all, how could we even have that the minors are liable? Lo yehei ela azuk azuke. They're just like people who did damage. So Amarav Papa Haki Kamma. This is what the Brisa is trying to say. That if it was left in front of them and they still had not yet consumed it, bein gedolim, bein ketanim chayavim. Doesn't make a difference whether they're adults or children, then they are chayiv. And it's because, and this, of course, is precisely, Ken, the point of view that you were highlighting. We said before that if the item still exists, then even the children should be liable. And that's exactly what we're saying now. And that, I believe, is the actual halacha. So in fact, the cases that we're talking about are, you have the where we say the children don't have to give it back. You have to qualify them very significantly, and in particular say that we're dealing with a situation where the original owner had totally given up any hope of recovery. Mark, they could use your help downstairs. So Amar Rava.
Now, how do they change the Bryce here from saying goes machil banav to say avadayin lo achlum? We're trying to bring a Bryce that they consumed it. Now we say no, we have to change it. Achi Kamar, that they didn't consume it.
Correct. Well, first of all, you ask an excellent question. I don't have a great answer for you other than to say that it can't possibly be that that if they ate it, that the minors would be liable. So that's the issue. Is we can't. The wording just doesn't work. So we have to change something about it. And so this is what Rav Papa had as the effort. So, but you're absolutely right.
No, but it's a complete
I know.
reversal. In some cases, we have to modify the Bryce. You're missing a word, meaning, and okay, you had a word here there, but to change it 180 degrees, the exact opposite, it almost defeats the purpose of presenting the Bryce in the first place.
Agree with you completely.
Maybe I'm missing something here. It's not that's.
Yeah, I don't have I don't have a great answer for you. I don't have a great answer, and I don't see a great answer here in the notes either. As to, I mean, on some level, it's maybe we could say that it was left for them, meaning, and they consumed it, so it was left for them as intact, and now maybe they consumed it after the court case was brought, so they were already liable. But again, I don't have a great answer as to why we were treating this as if it was still in existence. Yeah. All right. So I mean, you're absolutely right. Like I said, don't have a great answer. So now the Gemara is going to turn to other inherited property that did not actually belong to the father. And Rava is going to have a series of statements associated with it. So Amar Rava, what happens if a father leaves for his children a borrowed cow? So mishtamshin ba kol yemei she'elasa. So the children can use it for as long as the father had intended to borrow it. Mesa, if it dies, ein chayavin ba'onaseha. They are not liable for anything unavoidable associated with it, as Rashi says about 12, 13, 14 lines up in the narrow lines. Ein chayavin ba'onaseha. Delo kabilu alayo netirusa. They never accepted the liability associated with it. They never accepted it because they weren't the borrowers. So as a result, they aren't liable associated with those kinds of things that happen. So Kisvurim shalaviem he utvachua va'achluhu. What happens if it turns out that they thought that it was belonged to their father, and so they slaughtered the cow and they ate it? So Mishalman Demei Vasar Bizol, they have to just pay the value of cheap meat, because again, the lender, when the borrower dies, needs to go and immediately try to claim it back. And if the children weren't aware and they thought it was theirs, so we're not going to charge them the full amount of that item. If the father left for the children real a property that against which you can have a lien, namely real property, chayavim l'shalom, so then they're liable to pay. Now the question is this third statement of Rava, is it referring to the most recent statement and saying that actually if the children inherited the real property, then they don't just pay the value of the meat, but they pay the value of the real property, they pay the full value of the cow? Or are they saying that that on the first case of not being liable if something were to happen, that if the father inherited real property, then the children would have to pay back, even if something unavoidable happened and the cow died? So that's the question. There are those who teach that last line on the first part of Rava's ruling. And there are some who teach it on the second of Rava's rulings. And those who teach it on the first ruling, saying that you're going to be liable even if an animal dies fully, well then, because you inherited property, well then they will say that they've certainly, if the children ate the animal, that they would be liable in full in that situation as well. Upligi the Rav Papa, and then they will disagree with something that Rav Papa says, but it's not that we haven't yet told you what Rav Papa said, so we got to tell you that, but just believe me that they will disagree with what Rav Papa said. And man demasila aseifa, those who teach it with respect to the second case, the case where the children ate it without realizing that it didn't belong to them, and therefore they would be liable associated with it in full. Aval areisha lo, but in a case where it just died on its own, they wouldn't be liable. Behind Rav Papa, and that would be consistent with Rav Papa. So what was Rav Papa's statement? Dama Rav Papa, Haisa para genuva lo utvacha b'Shabbos. If somebody stole a cow and then slaughtered it on Shabbos, so the cow was already stolen, chayiv, he's going to be liable for the 5-time payment, because even though the time that he'd be liable for the 5-time payment is exactly the time that he's liable for the death penalty, but he was already liable for the theft. And so as a result, the liability associated with the 4 or 5-time payment, in this case 5-time because we're talking about a cow, so that liability, we don't say kimle b'derabamine, but because shekvar chayav b'geneva kodem sheyavu l'idei Yisur Shabbos, because he was already liable for the theft before he became liable for the violation of Shabbos. On the other hand, if he had a borrowed cow and he slaughtered it on Shabbos, putter, then he's not going to be liable at all. Everything came at the same time. And so in the second case, if we say that Rava's statement of being liable if there's real property only applies to the second case, so then that makes, well, like, you know what, let's do Rashi. Rashi helps us out here. Aresha, Deka Amar, it's the Rashi 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi on Kuf Yud Bet Amud Aleph. Aresha Deka Amar Mesa Ein Chayavin Ba'on Seha. Right? If you say that what Rava's statement was on the Resha and saying that you're not chai with own sin, but if the father left over karka, you would be liable. So because what's the concept here? The concept is that as soon as you borrow the item, the father's property became subject to a lien, a conditional lien, if something were to happen to the animal. The kasava rava chiyuva onsin mishas sha'ela. The obligation, according to Rava, of the onsin happens at the moment of the borrowing. And so too in the case of Rav Papa. He would therefore disagree with Rav Papa because Rav Papa says that it all happens not at the moment of the borrowing. Because if you borrow the cow and then slaughter it on Shabbos, you're putter because it doesn't make because your items do not take on the lien immediately. And so as a result, that shows that Rava would disagree with Rav Papa if you teach Rava's learning of the real estate on the first part, on his first statement in connection with something happening ba'onis. So mutal al hashoel. So again, as soon as you borrow it, the potential liability for any kind of onus thing that happens against your will, so then that is already liable on your property. Upliga de Rapapa, and that argues with Rapapa de Amr Lakaman, as we just saw, and as Rashi is saying, we will see in a moment. Lo ramichi of onsin ashoel ad shas shetianis. The obligation doesn't kick in. Even the hints of the obligation don't kick in until the actual moment of the onus. So that's the situation. And so now we've explained that. And now the Gemara teaches another brisa regarding something, returning something robbed, and records a specific case. So Tanu Rabbanan, Gazal, the Torah says that you should return the stolen item, the robbed item. So Matam Lomar Asher Gazal. Why does it specifically say that he robbed? Yasser Ka'en Shagazel. He needs to return it the way it was when he robbed it, the person. Mikan Amru, from here we say, Hagoza Umachilos Banav. If you rob somebody and you feed your children, Paturim Shalim, the children are not liable for paying the owner. So however, if it was left for them as an inheritance, being gadol and being katanim chayav, whether children or adults, they are going to be whether minors or adults or minors, they're going to be chayavin. Mishum sumchas omer. However, in the name of sumchas, it was said gadolim chayavim katanim patur. The adults are chayav, the minors are exempt. Because they're still minors, so we want to, and we basically will argue on their behalf that they aren't going to be liable until they become an adult. So let's have a situation. So Bar Chamua Rabbi Yirmiyah, the son of Rabbi Yirmiyah's father-in-law, so essentially either his wife's brother or his wife's half-brother, Tarak Galei Ba'ape, to Rabbi Yirmiyah. He would close the door in the face of Rabbi Yirmiyah. He would not let Rabbi Yirmiyah into the house. And we're talking about the house that he inherited from his own father. And so Rabbi Yirmiyah went to Rabbi Abin and said, listen, Amar, and said, this house belongs to me. And he said, Shalohu Toveya. So when Rabbi Abin said back to him, he's claiming what's his. Meaning the point is that for all the rest of the world, it looks like this son of your father-in-law inherited the property from his father. So Amr Lei, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, but listen, but I have witnesses that I took possession of this, meaning I bought it from his father while the father was still alive, and I even took possession of it. So Amr Lei, but do we accept witnesses as we turn to Kuf Yud Bet Amud Aleph, Yom Bet Amud Bet? Shalo b'fnei baldin, when we're not in front of the litigant, meaning the minor, and Rashi says it explicitly, v'hai katan, top Rashi on Kuf Yud Bet Amud Bet, v'hai katan kamanda leisi dami. This minor child is as if he's not present in court because he's a minor, and we don't accept witnesses when the other litigant is there. Below, and second, Rabbi Yirmiyah points out, that's not right. We do accept witnesses against minors, because listen to this price of Haktani, Bein Gedolim, Bein Katanim, Chayavin. We say that when a property is left over for the heirs, whether they're adults or minors, they're going to be liable. So the only way that the children can be liable is if they're allowed to be brought to court and have testimony brought against them. So Amrale, Rav Abin said to him, Hare machlokas sumchas b'tzidcha. 1 second. Sumchas disagrees with you. And Simchas says that only the adults are going to be liable. So Amar, Ichbal, Kule Alma, V'kai Kisumchas La Kulan Didi. Is Is sumchus, who's an individual, does everybody agree to sumchus, and therefore I lose what belongs to me? So adahachi igalgal milsa asa umata lekamei de Rabbi Abahu. So the matter, was discussed, and it eventually came to Rabbi Abahu. And Rabbi Abahu said, Amar lo shemiya lechu had Rav Yosef bar Chama Amar Rabbi Oshia. 1 second. Doesn't Rav Yosef bar Chama's statement in the name of Rabbi Oshia cover us? The Amar Rav Yosef bar Chama Amar Rabbi Oshia Tinuk should talk up abadav v'yared letoch sadeh shel chavero v'amar shalihu. If a minor child takes his slaves and goes into somebody else's, this little kid is going to be a criminal mastermind, because what does he do? He takes his slaves and he goes in and he forces himself into somebody else's property and says, you know what? This property belongs to me, because you know what? You can't do anything about it while I'm a minor. So ain't omrim namtin ad sheyagdu. We don't say, according to Rami Bar Chama in the name of Rabbi Oshia, that we wait until this child becomes an adult. Elamotziim miyado miyad. We take it away right away. And if he's actually the owner, so he'll bring witnesses when he becomes an adult. So doesn't this show that Rabbi Yirmiyah should win this case?
So
No,
who's the minor here? Was Rabbi
no.
Yirmiyahu
Rabbi
the
Yirmiyah
minor?
is the adult. The minor is his wife's brother or stepbrother or half brother.
So he was the katan. Where do we learn? Where does it say that before?
It said at the very beginning of the statement, Bar Chamua de Rabbi Yirmiyah Tara Galela. You know what? It does not say it explicitly until we say that V'chi Mekablin Edim Shelo B'fnei Baal Din, and we then say V'hai Katan. Rashi tells us that it's a Katan. So you're absolutely right that it did not say it explicitly in the Gemara that the son of Rabbi Yirmiyah's father-in-law was a minor, but it is by context that has got to be the case. Because Rabbi Yirmiyah wants to bring witnesses, and we say that there's no way to bring the witnesses in front of the other litigant because the other litigant is a minor. So you're absolutely right that it was not explicit, but it's clear from the implicit nature of the case that that's what we're talking about.
It was a little confusing there because when I heard you say Shelo b'fnei Baldin,
That's why
I was thinking Rabbi Yirmiyah was the minor because he's the one bringing the witnesses. So
no. He's the one who's got the witnesses. He's fine, but the other side is the one v'hai katan command delay dummy. This minor child against whom you're bringing the witnesses. If the minor has the witnesses, that's totally fine. It's when the losing side is the minor. That's where we're going to have a problem. But now Rabbi Oshia and this teaching of Rabbi Oshia is rejected because midami, are these cases comparable? Because hasam hu demafkina midnei delo kaimile achazaka davua. In the case of the minor taking his slaves and going into somebody else's property, there was no assumption of ownership by the father. He has no claim of ownership other than his forcibly entering the location. But maybe in the case of the Rabbi Yirmiyah, where the minor son of the father-in-law enjoys an assumption of ownership because it belonged to his father, we're not going to take it away from him in a case when the child is still a minor. So the answer isn't that the case is lost forever. It's just lost until the minor grows up. So now that we've discussed this, we're now going to have further discussion regarding the acceptance of witnesses in the absence of a litigant. And so we're going to have a series of cases of where we might accept a witness when there isn't another litigant. So Amar Rashi, Amar Rabbi Shabsai, Mekabel Meidim Shelo B'fnei Baldin. We do accept witnesses when the other litigant isn't around. Tehei Ba Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan was thinking about it. That doesn't make any sense. So Kibla Mine Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. So Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, gave him the following explanation as saying that this is how we accepted this teaching. Kigon Shahayahu Chola, because it could be that the main litigant the other litigant, the adult litigant, is not well. Oh, Adim Cholim, or the witnesses are not well. Oh, Shahayu Adam of action Medina Sayam, or the witnesses want to go overseas. The Shalku, or the Shalku, and in each of these cases, low below Shalku, the Shalku low below Ba. We're dealing with a situation where the defendant was summoned, but he didn't come to court. Now,
they didn't have Zoom then.
Correct. They did not have Zoom then. Exactly. That's exactly right. So it's interesting to think about how these rules would change in a world filled with Zoom. So you're absolutely right. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Mekablim Edim Shalo B'fnei Baldin. And we have another similar ruling that says, again, we accept witnesses when they're not, even when the litigant's not around. Amar Mar Ukva qualified it as follows. L'didei it was explained to me specifically by Shmuel, where the case began, and now the person it was sent for and didn't come. If they had if the court case did not come, the defendant could say, I wanted to go to the high court. Well, one second, if he says that I want to go to a more important court, why not let him make that claim even if the case had begun? I want to go to the high court. So Amaravina could go to Naka Diskam and based in Agadol, where the higher court that he wants to go to sends a letter saying, no, you should handle this case. That's where we're going to say, tough luck. Even if you don't come to court, we're not going to allow you to escape the testimony. So as a result, if you don't come to court when you're supposed to, you're going to have to, they will take the testimony even without your presence. So Amarav Rav says, not only do we do a case, but we will allow a document, a loan document, to be confirmed without the other, without the borrower being present. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, but Rabbi Yochanan says, no, we don't do that without the borrower present. So Amarle Rav Sheshel to Rabbi Yossi Barabahu, Asperalach, time to Rabbi Yochanan. I'm going to give you the reason of Rabbi Yochanan, because Amarkra, that when we talk about the testimony against an ox that has gored, the testimony is that you have to do it in front of the owner of the ox. Because we have to say that he didn't guard it. So Amra Torah, so the Torah is telling us, Yavu Bal Hashor v'Yamod al Shoro, and the owner of an ox needs to stand by his ox. So when the testimony happens, similarly, the person who owes the money under this contract needs to stand by the contract when the testimony is brought again regarding the contract. So Amarava Hilchas and Mekaimin as a star Shalom Bifnei Baldin. But notwithstanding Rabbi Yochanan's statement, we're going to follow the halacha like Rab, and we'll say that we're going to allow the loan document to be certified. Even if the borrower is shouting that it's obviously that this is a bad document, Rashi says. The Amar, and if the borrower says, however, if the borrower says, Nikitu li zimna adamaisna Sahadi Umar Ana Lishtara. I want to show that this is a bad star and give me time to bring witnesses. Naktina, we're going to give him the time. Us. And if the witnesses come in the time that we give him, great. The Ilo Asa, but if they don't come, Natrinan lay Sheni v'chamishi v'sheni. We're going to give him a Monday, a Thursday, and a Monday. We'll give him a little bit of wiggle room. Ilo Asa, if they still haven't come, Kasvina Psicha Alve. We're going to write him an excommunication for 90 days. Now, what are those 90 days for? We're going to tell you. Telasin kamai lo nachtinan lifnechse. For the first 30 days, we don't go into his property to take it away. Because maybe he's trying to borrow the money in order to pay back the debt. In the middle 30 days, we also won't go into his property. Because maybe he didn't find anybody who would lend him. So now he needs to sell his property. And so he's busy trying to sell it at a fair value. And in the last 30 days, we also will be lenient and won't go into his property to take it. Because maybe the buyer is trying to find the money. So lo asa, if even after those full 90 days of being in excommunication, we say he still hasn't come back with the money. Adrachta anichse. So then we're going to write a document that allows us to seize his property. And all of this is when he's saying that he's agreeing that he's going to come to court and participate in the court case. Aval Amar lo asina. If he says I'm not coming to the court, la alter kasvina, then we would write the seizure immediately, and he would have his property taken immediately. Bahani mili b'milva, and all of this is dealing with a loan, because in a loan situation, a person borrows the money in order to use it. So when the person comes back and asks for their money back, it makes sense that he may not have the money handy because he was told to use it. If the person was given something to watch, la alter kasvina, then we write the deposit. Then we write then we write the seizure document immediately because he needs to have not lost the item. So v'chi kasvina, and when we write it, amakarke, we write it only for land that the defendant owns, not amatal. We will not write it for movable property. Dilma shamid va'achil lahu malva limital tele, because maybe the lender is going to take that property and he'll consume it if it's real, if it's a movable property. Because it could be that actually the defendant was right, and he's spent all 90 days trying to track down the witnesses to show that this was a bad document, but he was unsuccessful. But maybe after the plaintiff takes the money, he won't be able. He'll finally be able to prove his case. The borrower will be able to prove his case and say that this was not a loan. I didn't borrow the money. And as a result, if in fact what was collected from him was movable property, lo mishkach migba, the borrower will be totally out of luck because he won't be able to collect back anything because it will all have been consumed. However, if the lender has property, then we can write it, because then at least the borrower, who now has proven that actually he never borrowed money from the lender in the first place, or he borrowed the money and he paid back, will be able to say, listen, I need to collect that money back because you've collected from me twice. So as a result, as a result, because the lender has real property, so we know that the borrower will get his money back. Velohi. But the Gemara says, you know what? That's actually not true. Even if the lender has real property, we do not allow the seizure of adrachta amitalto lo kasvina. We don't write a seizure for movable property. Avagat the Islam Makarke, even though the lender has real property, because Chayshina and Shema Techsif, because we're worried that that property may deteriorate in value, and now the borrower who never actually borrowed will never be able to get his money back that he did, and effectively will have facilitated a theft by the lender. And when we write the seizure, we have to tell the borrower that we did that. The honey mili demikra. And of course, that assumes that the borrower is nearby. About mirachaklo. But if he's far away, then we're not going to bother to notify him. The mirachak, the ika krovim. But if he's far away and he's got relatives that are nearby, inami ika shayarasa, the asli asula hasam, or there are caravans that of businessmen that go to that location on a regular basis. Mashinan like Tracer Yarke Shata will give him 12 months of the year in order to pay back, in order to notify him, so that the caravans can go and then come back. Because we had the situation where Ravina had Mar'acha wait 12 months of the year before giving him a seizure document. Because he had lent money to people in Chozai and then in Beit Chozai, and we wanted to have the caravan come back. But again, but actually we don't wait 12 months, because Hasam Inish Alima Hava, that person, that Mar'acha rather, was very powerful. And if we gave him the seizure warrant into his hand, lo havi efshar la'apukimine, we wouldn't be able to remove it from him because he was too influential and too powerful that even if the court said that actually this is not a valid seizure warrant, we would be stuck and he would be holding it. But in an ordinary case, we do not wait for the defendant. We'll give him until Tuesday, meaning we notify him on Monday, he's got to come in the next day. And he should therefore travel one day and get to us. And then he'll stand in court on Thursday. So basically, if you're within a range of 1 day travel, so then we'll go and get you. Otherwise, you'll have to defend this case when it comes to you after the travel. So with that,
well, but I'm a little confused between the borrower and the lender. Why would we say that if the lender wants to get his money back, why are we saying that the borrower wants to get his money back if he was the one who borrowed money from the lender?
So the caveat is that what happens if it turns out that the borrower's document was either already paid back and there are witnesses that it was paid back, or there are witnesses that say that the document was forged. So what happens if the borrower has those, but he just doesn't have the ability to find them? He can't find those witnesses. He can't get them. They traveled overseas, and he's not able to bring them. So at some point, we need to still allow the lender to the alleged lender to make his claim and to take the money. But at the same time, we want to give some level of protection to the borrower just in case the lender is making the whole thing up. So we're trying to weigh the two sides of this litigation and say, look, you've had the time, borrower, to prove your case. You weren't successful, so we're going to allow the lender to collect. At the same time that we are allowing the lender to collect, we have to recognize that because of circumstances, it could be that the borrower is correct. He's never admitting that he owes the money. If he admitted he owed the money, he would have paid on his own. But we're dealing with a situation where he says, listen, I believe this is a forgery, or I know I paid this back and I have witnesses, but I just can't find them. So as a result, when we give the lender the ability to take the property away from the borrower, we're going to make him take only real property, because real property allows us to be assured that the borrower will be able to make a claim against the lender if in fact he brings witnesses that says that, you know what, this wasn't a real loan, or I paid it back, and in fact I don't owe you anything.
Oh, so then the borrower could get the money or the property back. Then, if we could force the borrower to get the property back from the lender who took it
exactly.
without illegally, essentially.
Correct. And if we allow the lender to grab movable property, it could be that property will be gone and there won't be any ability to collect.
They could eat it, destroy it,
exactly,
sell it,
exactly.
whatever.
Exactly. Or he could sell it to some third party.
Right.
Movable property has no lien against it. Whereas if he sold the real property to a third party, he sells the property to you, Ken, you buy it subject to all those kinds of liens.
There's a lien.
What?
There's a lien on the property. And the property didn't move. You can always find the property.
Exactly. All right. So next time we're going to pick up, we mentioned that court messenger. The Gemara is going to turn to that topic. But for that discussion, please stay tuned to tomorrow's daf. Looking forward to continuing our learning together. Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Bye now.